Hi, and welcome to Sinatra episode 3. In this episode, we're going to continue with our working controller, and two of our actions, we're going to have all three parts, the model, view, and the controller working together. The index and show actions are going to be is what we're going to be working with. We'll go ahead and get started, and I wanted to point out that I've added a couple of files here, and feel free to pause the program here to go ahead and type out these ERB files. I've added them under Views Contacts, and it matches the action name, so Index ERB and Show ERB. And I've just implemented pure HTML at this point for the two of them. So we have a good starting point, and then we will insert dynamic elements there based on our models. So if you want to go ahead and pause it, you can take the time to type these out. The controller that you see on the left is what we have as a result of episode 2. Once you have the HTML files ready, you can unpause it, come back, and we'll add the dynamic elements. So the first thing that we're going to do is change our controller actions to use the new views that we've created. And the way that Sinatra and Ruby work is the last line executed is what gets returned. So we can leave the code that's already there as is, and we just need to add a new line here that says ERB, and then we give it a reference to where the file is in our file structure. Now this is usually similar to the paths that someone puts in the browser, but they're not the same and they don't have to be the same. This has to do with the file path from views. So you see I say contacts, index, and I can leave the extension off since we're calling ERB, it can infer that. But again, it's our file system here that matters for calling ERB, not the path that the user puts in the browser. So I'm going to do a similar thing in the show action down below, and same thing, I can leave the code there as long as this is the last line executed, we should be okay. And I have the server running, so I can come here, this is what the old contacts index page looked like. So when I refresh it, what I should see is my new HTML. And again, I've put in spots for placeholders that we will put in dynamic data further on in the episode. And then I've also given one example of what I would want it to look like when the dynamic data is in here. And then I can click on show, and that should take us to our new show page. And again, I have a lot of placeholders in here that we were going to insert dynamic data into later on in the episode. So make sure that with your new HTML files, that when you reload these pages, that they're loading the views. And what this means is now we have the model working with the controller and the view working with the controller, and now we just have to get the controller to coordinate that model and that view with the correct data. So we're going to once again start with the show action to make sure that we can get this coordination between the model, view, and controller working for one contact. So what's important to note here is this instance variable that we've created will be in scope in our view. So we will be able to access it just by saying @contact. The only thing that we have to do in our ERB file is indicate what parts of this are static HTML and what part is dynamic Ruby. And the way that we do that, some people call them cinnamon sticks, it's the less than sign and then the percentage sign. That indicates that you're going to execute some Ruby code, and then you also have to close those brackets. Now, this won't work for the case that we need here because we need some Ruby code to execute, and then we also need the outcome of that execution to be inserted into our static HTML, and we just add an equals for that. So let's just try the first thing. Let's get the contact ID and see if that shows up. So I'll refresh this page, and there's the ID 12. So now we have dynamic data there. I'm going to try another contact just for completeness sake, and when it reloads we see the ID 1 there. So now to make it more interesting, let's replace the rest of these placeholders. So the first one, first name, last name, email, and then of course we'll need to replace these with the name of our attributes, which is also the name of our columns in this case. Last name and email. And we'll refresh. Now my contact number 1 does not have a first name or last name, so that just shows up as blank. If we go back to my contact number 12, then we should see something for each field. And choose the contacts that you've created there. These are the IDs that exist in my database. They may be different for yours. And now that we know that we have it working for the show action, we'll move on to the index action and make sure that the view works for that. And I'm going to leave these placeholders here, and I'm going to just take one example, move it down to the bottom, and then just like I said before, these contacts, this instance variable, will be in scope over here. And just like before, we're going to have to create some embedded Ruby. And what we want to do for these contacts is go through each of them. So I'm going to use the Ruby enumerable each, and I'm going to create a variable in scope here called contact, and then we'll close our brackets here. Now notice I'm not putting equals here because I don't want the outcome of this specific line of code to end up in my HTML. I just need it to loop through the way that Ruby does. And similarly, I'll have to add an end statement here and close out. So now that I have that in place, I can use this contact that's local here, and I can replace this ID placeholder. So this time I do want the equal sign because I want this to end up on the HTML at the end. So notice now it's contact without the @ sign because I have this local variable rather than an instance variable that I'm using. So I can do this, and I could do the same thing and go through email placeholder, but what I'm going to do is use a mix of Ruby interpolation and ERB interpolation. So I'm going to move this over here, and then I'm going to use string interpolation for these two fields where the contact ID goes here, and then I have a dash, and then in place of the email placeholder, I have contact.email. So before I move on, the link is going to be a little more complex. So I'm just going to make sure that this bit works. So we'll come back and we'll check out our index page again. And I'm going to have the placeholder still in there. And we'll see though that we've looped through and it is showing all of these. I just have the link placeholder to take care of. So we'll go back and take care of that now. Now my starting point looks like this. So that will be my starting point down here as well. And the only thing that I really need to be different in this line is this needs to be the ID of my contact. So I'm going to use ERB interpolation here, and you can insert this really anywhere. And same thing, it's going to be the contact.id in this case, and then we need to close out our ERB interpolation. I'll save that. We'll refresh this page. There, and now we have the link placeholders. And it's hard to see, but down at the bottom, when I hover over these different show links, it is specific to that contact. So if I click on this one, I should see the show page for Bernita, and that worked just fine. I just have one thing that I want to clean up that I see. I need to get rid of these placeholders, and it looks like I need to add a space in here for the formatting to be consistent with my template. So I'll do that, and then I'll remove the placeholders that I had in previously. I will save, and then we will refresh, and hopefully the placeholders will be gone, the spacing is correct, and I have all the dynamic data using my model view and controller. So that's how you can wrap up using all three parts of MVC for two of the RESTful actions, index and show. I'm just going to do a little bit of house cleaning here before I go. I no longer need that part of the index action. I no longer need this part of the show action. And I'm going to remove the puts params as well. You can leave it in there for debugging purposes. It can be helpful, but I'm going to take it out for a little bit of house cleaning. So as always, we'll end by committing our changes, and you'll see that we've modified the application, but we've also added some files that are in a new folder. So I'll do a git add dot, and then we'll do a git status and we'll see all those changes here. And so we'll go ahead and commit those. Just like that. So we'll see you next time.